Orson Welles, The Road to Xanadu, written and read by Simon Callow. The Road to Xanadu begins in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The incongruity of his birthplace is commented on again and again in accounts of Welles. Every country has its joke towns, good for an easy laugh, and if Kenosha is not quite in the league of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or Normal, Illinois, it is still sufficiently redolent of boondockery to seem to mock the very idea of aspiration in its sons and daughters. Kenosha, Wisconsin, was nonetheless the scene of Welles's earliest experience, and his family were prominent and engaged participants in its intense life. Welles's father, Richard Head Welles, was in trade. It became important for Welles to romanticize his father. Central to his image of him was the fact that he was an inventor. He was, but his inventions were largely confined to the business in which he worked, and that was the lamp trade. It would appear that his heart was not entirely in his work. His creative mind was engaged in his inventions, while the rest of him was drawn irresistibly to the flesh-pots of Chicago, frequenting the splendid musical comedies to be found at Mortimer Singer's various establishments, and seducing the young ladies of their choruses. During these evenings of dining and yarning and delicious debauchery, he began to drink more than ordinarily socially. It may be presumed that he went home as rarely as possible, neither to the sober house his mother had provided for him, still less to her own on the other side of Kenosha's main square. Named Rudolphsheim, it was a squat, massive building studded with beer bottles in defiant proclamation of her second husband's déclassé profession of brewer. Orson Welles was frank in his loathing of this grandmother, Mary Head Wells Gottfredson. In general, it is hard not to share his feeling. Wagnerian is the word that comes most vividly to mind in describing her. Physically tiny, her eyes ablaze, she seems to embody the triumph of the will. Her courtship of Orson's grandfather seems to belong more to the insect world than to that of normal human relations. The daughter of a powerful Kenosha attorney, she had travelled unaccompanied to St. Joseph, Missouri, for reasons that are unclear. There she met and selected for her future husband an amiably good-looking freight clerk by the name of Richard Welles, whisked him back to her appalled family in Kenosha, and proceeded in frank defiance of them to marry him. She was at the time 14.5 years old. No protest of her formidable family would deter her, not even the legendary temper of her father, Orson Head, draconian attorney and sometimes senator. The 14-year-old bride and her 26-year-old spouse made their way back to St. Joseph, where they quickly went through her substantial dowry, returned to Kenosha, with their son Richard, born in 1872, and set up house, finally moving in with Mary's protesting family after her father's death. By 1881, Richard Sr. had had enough and fled, thereafter to pursue a nomad's life, an occasional inventor and perennial bon viveur, just like his son. His was a ghostly existence. Last sighted in 1901, he had been declared dead some 16 years before by his formidable ex-wife to enable her to collect the patrimony conditional on his demise. Once she had consigned Richard to the ranks of the living dead, Mary remarried, this time scandalizing her family for a second time, to the Danish-American brewer Gottfredson, soon giving birth to her second son, Rudolph, after whom she named her ugly beer-bottle-studded folly. It was in this dismal dwelling that Richard Welles, Jr. grew up with a stepfather for whom he had no feeling and who had none for him, a much younger step-brother who was a model of good behaviour, and a mother single-mindedly devoted to outraging the family who had so disapproved of her. Richard Welles escaped this ménage as soon as possible. By 1901, well established in business, he had his own house and a reasonable income. In 1903, he met a formidable young woman with whom he fell powerfully in love. Beatrice Ives's background was, like her suitor's, commercial and Midwestern. Her father had been a prosperous coal merchant in Springfield, Illinois, where she was born in 1882, but had suffered during the coal slump of the 1880s. They continued to maintain an impressive establishment just outside Kenosha, but it was a squeeze to make ends meet. Beatrice Ives and her mother Lucy gave music lessons in order to survive. Richard and Beatrice had very different notions of marriage. He was looking forward to relaxing into it. She saw it as a springboard for a life of achievement, in the arts, in social amelioration, in self-improvement. Freed from economic embarrassment, he was no millionaire.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?